Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, if I could direct your attention to the PowerPoint presentation of the slides. It's entitled Research Data Presentation, August 2018. And these are the slides essentially that you have seen before, with an exception to that. What we realized is that we had a 67% response rate to the salary survey. But through additional research that other members of the staff had done, the very comprehensive looking spreadsheet that you have actually included the data that we did not receive from answers from the salary survey. So what we did is we went through the spreadsheet and we added all of the other cities that did not respond to all of these charts. Okay. So what you'll find is instead of, what was it, Lawrence, 16 or 17, I think, respondents to the salary survey, something around that. Instead, you'll find all 24 cities' data, including, of course, Columbus.
There were 8 additional cities on this?
That's right. Thank you. There were 8 additional cities we added to this.
Okay.
A quick question on this, if I could, Chair. As we've talked about with different speakers that have come through, the city's growth is pretty fast-paced. I'm curious to know if there are other, based on your research and work that you've done to benchmark, benchmark cities, is there an aspirational status of where we're trying to get, in terms of, I guess, are there other cities that we are, it looks like we will be in the near future the size of that we're not currently the size of? So I know that, these are very comparable sizes to us now currently, but since we're working into the future, I just was curious to know if there were any particular markets that we know we're going to be the size of, Austin, Texas, if all things hold in the next 4 years. So
sure, yeah, Commissioner Diaz, I think that's a question that it kind of comes in when you think about it. To whom are we going to compare ourselves? Mm-hmm. And yes, certainly looking down the road, we have that constant list going of what I've always referred to as our core peer cities, mm-hmm. not just our peer cities, but our core peer cities, because they have similar economic conditions, they have similar size, of course, similar general fund budgets, but in addition to that, we also look at geographic location. Is there a different cost of living? Say, for example, we match Denver or Seattle. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great, but because it's farther to the West Coast, is that necessarily a good thing to do? My point in bringing all of this up is that we could look at the data and keep diving into it and deeper Sure. and deeper and deeper, and we still wouldn't end up with exactly what we needed, because it's almost an exponential dive into it. Is that you could go farther down and then find, well, let's ask this question and go Sure. even farther. But to answer your original question, there is certainly that is taken into consideration. We're the 15th largest city, and I believe you're right. It's either Austin, Charlotte, or Indianapolis.
Maybe Nashville.
Nashville, yeah. So it's we're right there, but certainly as we grow, those other cities, progressive growing cities, are in much the same condition we're in, okay. In a positive manner Great. Of speaking. So
perfect. So Austin, Charlotte, Nashville. That's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, yes. And I'd also say an important number are the number of council people you have. I mean, we still have less than most, so that logic tells you that they have more responsibility or more work to do than if they were a 9 or 11 or 13 person body.
Certainly, and then looking at it from a perspective of a ward system or a non-ward system, and of course Columbus is not on the ward system at this point, so our council members are representing
Right.
the entire city.
Actually, we are the lowest in our
Yes, sir, I believe you're right.
the cities we're comparing. Anything, Joe, is that?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
And so that's what we wanted to make sure we brought to your attention, just that it's updated data from the research data presentation. There are 8 additional cities added. The next set of slides, this will be new data for you. It's called Research Data Presentation Additional Analysis. It should be right under that first one.
Gotcha.
So what we've done here, these slides, and there are 22 slides, but it's new, but it's not new. It's what we tried to do is look at the data all at the same place. So you've already seen the mayor base salary. For example, I'm on slide 1, page 2. You've seen the mayor base salary and the general fund budget. But what we decided to do is come up with a few additional indicators for you where those two are being compared all in the same place. So for example, and it's certainly up to you, commissioners, but I wasn't planning on going through every single slide. I will certainly do that if you choose to. But essentially, it's the bars are the mayor's base salary, and that salary legend is listed on the left side. And then to compare and contrast, how does this look with the general fund budget of that city? And so if you look on the right-hand side, that legend is for the general fund budget, and the green diamonds are where that falls. So you would use the legend on the right for the general fund, you would use the one on the left for the mayor's salary. And of course, we've kept Columbus highlighted throughout all of these. But we configured this data in a few different ways. So, and of course, when we're talking about the mayor, we also figured in the city manager on a couple of slides, and I believe that's starting on page 5. And what we did essentially is we took all of those indicators that you've seen before, and I'll just run down the short list: the base salary, the per capita base salary, the salary as a percentage of general fund budget, and I think that was it. There are a couple additional ones for council members because, of course, it's a body instead of just one incumbent. And what we essentially did is just list them out for you to be able to compare and contrast and have all of that data right there in front of you. So it doesn't necessarily replace what you've seen before. We're hoping that it will be helpful for you to be able to look at all of those all in one place. Page 8 is a simple pie chart. It's the percentage of part-time and full-time council members. And remember, there is a section, a small section of council member, or excuse me, of cities where that role is not defined. It is neither part-time nor full-time. In this case, it's 17%. And then I think, was there another pie chart?
There's another pie chart for council president,
Oh, yes, thank you.
and then there's also.
Page 13.
This one combines the base salary, part-time, full-time, and general fund. That's unique to council.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so just like, thank you, Lauren, just like with the mayor and city manager, on page 9, because there was another variable thrown in there, full-time and part-time council members, that's what you'll find on page 9. So we weren't trying to be confusing with any of this by any means. We figured that if it's data that you can use packaged in this way, then that's great. If it's not something that you can use, then of course you still have the original slides. And we're available too, in case you'd like to look at the data in another way.
So our charter kind of splits the, I mean, it describes certain of these offices as full-time employment. Not the mayor?
Oh, yes, yes.
mayor-
Yeah,
Not council
not
members,
council
but-
members.
No, but not, council is not defined,
Correct.
but the other offices would be defined.
Is it mayor and city attorney?
And
Does it
auditor.
mention that for the auditor? It does, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that was the extent of what we wanted to show you there. Again, it's all five elected official positions, if you will. And it's compared and contrasted using those indicators that you've seen before. And again, base salary, per capita base salary, salary as a percentage of general fund budget.
Given our population, is there some explanation as to why our general fund is low? I'm looking at some other cities who I don't think are as large as we are, that have significantly, Detroit would be one, Cleveland is another.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, are you referring to a particular slide?
Well, pretty much. Well, I was looking at one particular slide,
Okay.
but I think on the general fund budget, that's static. I mean, that number would be consistent, I would think, across the line. Now, ours is 800 plus, but I see, if I can find Cleveland on any of these bar charts, that I think here's Detroit, that's higher. I thought I saw Cleveland being higher as well. Cleveland, yeah, significantly higher.
Yeah, Cleveland looks like about 200 million, I think.
And Cincinnati, these cities are almost half the population of Columbus today.
Less than half, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have significantly higher general fund revenues.
Yeah, on the spreadsheet here, according to it, Cincinnati's general fund budget is almost 400 million, and we've not cracked the,
The billion mark.
yes.
So
Oh,
tell
wait a
me,
minute.
tell me what goes into the general.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Yeah.
813,100,000 is Columbus's general fund budget. Cincinnati's is only 395 million.
Okay.
Cleveland's,
Okay,
Yeah,
in this
I-
chart, it's different.
I think
Okay.
Cleveland is slightly lower than ours.
okay, Cleveland's is slightly lower than ours.
But looking at the charts.
Okay,
It's
I'm
Denver
mistaken.
is 1.3 billion. Detroit is 1 billion. Austin is 1 billion. And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Chairman. I think it comes down to, in some cases, geographic location. I do believe that certainly when we take these quote-unquote unigovs, where it's both a city and a county combined, so the city of Columbus takes up the majority of Franklin County.
Right, right.
But of course, Franklin County is separate from everything in terms of
Maybe
government.
that's the answer, that some of these are unigovs.
In some cases, yes, and of course, we would spell that out there. So it's not just Charlotte, but it's Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and Baltimore County. But I take your point, is that in some cases, the city, even though similar in size, for example, Austin, is $1 billion, and Columbus is 200 million shorter.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so after that, the next document I'd like to call your attention to is a table. It's just a black and white table, and it's entitled Executive Summary of Indicators. In our thought process here with this is, you've got the charts, you've got all of the tables to put everything together so you can get that pictorial view. But what this document does is just in a simple table format, it takes those basic indicators of base salary, per capita base salary, and salary as a percentage of general fund budget, and we're showing you where Columbus ranks in that whole field of 25 cities in the first column. The second column, we related where Columbus is in relationship to the median. So for that particular elected official, he or she is, or that elected official is plus or minus above or below the median or at median.
So looking at the mayor line item, second and base salary, that's just a gross number, right? Or is that?
Yes, sir, that's across the board, base salary of all 25 of those cities. The mayor of Columbus is second highest paid.
But when we go to per capita, it drops to 16.
That's correct. And again, this is data that you have in the charts, but we just thought to put it on a table
Good.
to just to help summarize it for
It's
you.
very helpful, thank you.
Good, thanks. Oh, one other thing I wanted to point out about that, we didn't necessarily have data for every single city. Remember, we added the 8 cities, and so that is noted there. So for example, the council president's salary as a percentage of general fund budget, we only had data for, I remember why that is. Instead of there being 25 cities, there were 4 cities without council presidents. So instead of being out of 25, it's out of 21.
And these are all current, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Yeah. Great.
And then I just have one more document to show you. The last document is, it's a set of tables. It looks like this. It's projected salaries. We did this with the last commission 3 years ago, and it seemed to be helpful. So what we wanted to do is create this again for you, again, starting in the year 2022 and going through 2025. Pardon me. Just to assist you in looking out into the future, what we've done is we've come up with a group of projected salary tables, and it has a few assumptions to it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the mayor's, which is the first page. And in the top left corner, you'll see the 2021 base of $201,560. That is an assumption because, of course, in 2021, we don't know what the mayor's salary will be. The reason we don't know what the mayor's salary will be is because we don't have what the COLA, based off of the CPI, is until then, because we would, of course, base that off of the 2020 CPI in the future. So this is based on a 1.99% COLA going out, compounding year over year from the current to 2021.
1.99% is a 17-18 number, or?
Well, that was,
The 10,000?
in other words, where does this 1.99% come from? That was the other thing that I needed to discuss. 3 years ago, when the 2019 through 2021 salary projections were created by the last commission, 1.99% is the CPI that was calculated by Dr. Lafayette for the years 2011 through 2014. And that amount was used to make future projections for that time period that the last commission looked at. So that's where that 1.99% comes from.
That's a 14 number then.
It would be yes, sir. It would end at 14 because, of course, during the last commission, 2015 had not ended yet. Now, Dr. Lafayette updated those calculations, and that's what I wanted to turn your attention to. If you have his presentation from, was it July when he was here? And specifically, it's pages 4 and 5. And of note, you'll also find the same report from 3 years ago in the final report from the previous commission. This, of course, is updated data. On page 4, Dr. Lafayette took 2013 as the base year and went all the way through 2017. And as he explained when he was here last month, this is based on the CPI. It's specifically the CPI-U, meaning urban, if I remember correctly, Midwest size A. What that came out to at the top of page 5 is a 4-year average of 0.92%.
That was the actual.
Yes, sir, this is the updated data. So we could have created this salary projection table for you at 0.92%. However, if you look at Dr. Lafayette's report, he is suggesting in the last sentence of that paragraph, of the following paragraph that begins, the 4-year average is 0.92%. And again, I'm at the top of page 5 here. And if you'll indulge me, I'll just read that last sentence. The 0.92% is a ceiling, so unless the inflation rate declines significantly over the next year, which is not expected, officials will lose purchasing power. So what he did is he went on to do the same thing, but nationwide. And that's what the next table is for. Again, the same years, using 2013 as the base, ending in 2017. And you see there that he writes the 4-year average is a somewhat higher 1.48%. So again, going back to the projected salary tables, we could have also put 1.48% in there. But because essentially we didn't feel that that decision had been made yet, and that it certainly requires further consideration, what we did is we just kept it at the 1.99% from 3 years ago. And so that's where that number comes from in these projected salary tables.
He's saying the 12-month rate to June 2018 is 2.9, which is significantly higher than everything else we see on these charts.
And if I could ask
yes.
clarification or a reminder, Dr. Lafayette made a recommendation in his presentation for us to consider using a national average figure. Is that correct? The national, or was that recommendation what, was there a recommendation on his part based on what that percentage should look like?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I'm not prepared to answer that. I don't recall.
Okay.
What his recommendation was verbally. I was just going by the report.
Got it.
And I think that appears to be the implication.
Okay.
Because of his statement about it being less purchasing power.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I recall saying something to that effect,
Okay.
that we should look to the national, not the Midwest.
Got it.
So what it.
Which would be a change, right? That would be a change from where we currently are measuring the CPI.
Yes, sir, or I should, just to clarify, where we will be measuring the CPI, because the work that the commission did in 2015, those changes won't actually begin until 2019.
Oh,
The salaries were already set through this year.
okay. Okay.
So what I wanted to make sure you were aware of in your deliberation to consider pay for the elected officials through in the years 22 through 25 is that any type of salary projection table you would like us to construct for you, we can do that, and it's quite easy to do. We simply change the number 1.99 to whatever you would like it to be. So whether it's one of these numbers Dr. Lafayette provided or any other number you would choose, we're happy to make up that information. But just so you're aware, the 1.99%, that's where that figure comes from. So just to go over the rest of the chart briefly here, what you see is that the going off of that base salary, again, beginning in 2021, it goes up to 25% projections, 25% base salary increases. And then,
5%.
yes, sir, the bottom row.
Oh, I see, I see.
Right.
Okay.
And of course, we can create tables that go higher than that or stop and go lower than that. It was just a round number that we chose 3 years ago.
Okay.
And then going across, you can see there that 1.99% cost of living adjustment is applied each year. So you'll be able to look at a scenario, and so you're not having to calculate it, you'll be able to have that information there. The 4-year percentage change, the next to the last column, it is just that. So from the base salary to that 4th year, what was the percentage change in salary? That's what that shows. And then annually, what was the average pay increase? Again, under that scenario for that particular line. And then you'll find, of course, we've been focusing on the mayor, but you'll find on the next pages, the same is done for council member, council president, city attorney, and city auditor as well. Everything is consistent throughout.
I should know the answer to this, and it's probably very obvious. Is the cost of living an added to the base salary, or is it an adjustment, annual adjustment of the base salary?
The cost of living is added on to it.
So it's a permanent.
Yes, sir.
If we said 2%, it would be a permanent 2% every year.
Yes, sir. It's not like a bonus payment or anything like that.
No, but it's applied to the prior year, right? So each year, if it's 2%, then it's 2% of the base first year, and then the next year it'd be in effect 102% of that prior year.
Well, yes, it would increase by that cost of living adjustment. So essentially what you're doing is you're setting another base salary beginning in 2022. The first column, the percentage increase, is what we're providing for you to say, just for example, just to pick a number, a 3% salary increase. Well, if you wanted to know out into the future years past that, what a 3% salary increase right now would be, and then with that 1.99% cost of living adjustment added to it, that's what that would be.
cost of living adjustment on the salaries, something already in place regardless of what we do with moving base salaries? Or are we directing which index to use?
You're setting the cost of living,
Okay.
you're setting the base salary. The cost of living adjustment is based on the inflation rate.
Okay.
They have to choose what CPI to.
We have to,
to-
yeah.
They have to choose, the commission, under the charter, the commission is charged with setting the base salary and deciding on the CPI or the COLA.
Okay.
So you could decide, for instance, you could decide that the base salary beginning in 2022 is the number here for the mayor, for example, 205,571. That's a 0% increase to their, or to his base salary. And then you would say, we want the CPI to be calculated on the CPI nationwide, which would be 1.48%. So the salary in 2023 would be base plus 1.48%, and then 1.48% would last until the end of 2026. The next commission would then set a base and a CPI for 2026 to 2030.
Got it. Okay, so in the absence of that, what I was trying to figure out is whether there's any other automatic adjustment they're already getting without us.
If the commission decided to do nothing, recommend nothing, then in 2020, beginning January 1st, 2022, the elected officials would make whatever their base salary was at the end of 2021 for 4 years with no adjustments
Okay.
for COLA at all.
Great. So helpful information.
Just another question. Are there increases negotiated in all those who are under collective bargaining, which I would think is pretty much the overwhelming majority of city employees? Are their current contracts contemplating increases in base? Or flat plus CPI? What is the direction there? So we can
Right.
bump up that.
I'm not a labor relations professional, so I do know the overall, I know what takes place during union negotiations, and I believe it's discussed, but essentially, the collective bargaining process, there's negotiation for a percentage increase every year. On average, it's about 3% right now with our 6 unions. And they do that at a 3-year pace. So every
30% per year would be a 9%. Overall.
Overall. So my understanding is that what that tries to take into account is both inflation and some kind of a general pay increase.
Joellen, would you be able to kind of just give us just an average against against the contracts? I don't think probably have already stated an opinion about it.
So, Chair, you're asking for maybe what an average increase over the last 2 or 3 years has been to the union contracts?
Looking at the union contracts and, that are now in place in the 6 collective bargaining units, just what that average is, or any trends that you may detect that could be helpful, but just to kind of give us some idea of how salaries are moving into the future.
We can do that easily. Also, just, and we're limiting the conversation to unions, but we do have more employee groups. So for example, non-unionized employees actually, of course, would include the elected officials. They're in employee group we refer to as the MCP, or the Management Compensation Plan. And the MCP has received traditionally pay increases over the last several years, at least since the recession.
They'd be non-elected but exempt employees.
Yes, sir. The vast majority of them are exempt. In some situations, there are some that are non-exempt.
Oh, that information.
Very small amount.
Okay, yeah, that, if we could also have that.
Essentially, what we can do is put all the employee groups into one table or chart and show you what those pay increases have been. How far would you like us to go back?
Well, for purposes of our forecasting, I was really interested in where things were today. I'm assuming there's always a collective bargaining.
Well, we have two still going on.
And then, as one completes, they're looking at what gains. So I was thinking whatever's current would at least give us a trend line
Okay.
from which to forecast.
And, Mr. Chairman, that's all of the data that I had for you.
And to understand this chart, just one other question. To understand this chart, let's say the average is 3%. I think that's
Okay.
a number you used. That would be this left column.
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay, that would be reflected by that left column. Okay. And then a COLA.
Right, so what that shows there, the base salary, again, first page, the mayor, $201,560 in 2021. That, right beside the 3%, that $211,738 is that amount plus 3% with 1.99% COLA added on, because of course that's looking into 2022.
Are all the, another interesting question, this goes back to Dr. Lafayette's report. When the city is in negotiations, which of the 10,000 CPIs is being selected? Is it consistent across all collective bargaining agreements? Are we moving into a CPI different than if we were to, for instance, select instead of Midwest National? Are we moving in a direction away from where others are situated? I don't know how it's going to affect
Sure.
our outcome, but I think these are comparable
Certainly.
issues.
I don't want to disparage the collective bargaining process at all by any means, but I believe what the charter is requiring and what you as a commission is doing is much more detailed in terms of looking at the current CPI and the projected future CPI. So to be able to say that a particular bargaining unit and we as management bargaining with that union looked deeply into the CPI projections for the next 3 years for that contract, I don't believe that takes place.
But they would have had to have selected one of the CPI.
Not necessarily. Remember, as a commission, you're required by the charter to deal with the CPI. Okay. The unions, again, I'm not a labor relations professional, they're not necessarily, there's no requirement in the Collective Bargaining Act of 1983 that they're able, or that they are required to do that, to my knowledge. But again, I'm compensation, not labor relations, so.
Right. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir, you're welcome.
There's an agenda. Okay. Now we are to begin our discussions, discussing recommendations regarding compensation. And I guess what we mean here is to what is the criteria we're going to select? Is that in essence? Okay. So, any opinions formed, or, I know one opinion that we're, know of one.
Is that yours or mine?
Yours,
Oh, Well-
from the prior meeting.
well, I had said
Yeah.
before, and I just kind of piggybacking on Mr. Lafayette, and that is the one that he felt was most appropriate, I believe, was the one involving urban all units, rather than taking one of the various ones that had smaller components to it.
Right.
So I'm not one to argue with the guy who knows a lot more about it than I do, so that's,
So that would be the CPI. And it sounds like we also have to make a decision about setting a base.
Right, whether to increase the base or just
Right.
say, we'll just use Dr. Lafayette's recommended index, that will be the cost of living adjustment. And I think it sounds like based on looking backwards, we at least know that from the last 4 years with that national average, that was 1.48%. So I feel like looking at the chart that Greg and his team compared for us, we can see where does that actually put them? Do we need an increase in the base salary for where we think each position should be?
So Commissioner, are you saying it would be helpful for Greg to redo that chart for each elected official showing a 1.48% COLA as opposed to a 1.99% COLA?
What do the other commissioners think? I don't want to create, extra work over a half percentage point because it's a good forecast to see what these numbers look like. And I think we don't know for the years we're setting what that actual, or do we know it's 1.48 now? Does it apply from these?
It would be 1.48 because you're setting for 4 years based upon the previous 4 years CPI.
And just to reiterate, Commissioner, it really is very easy for us to make a change and re-provide a chart at a different amount. Very easy. So that's no problem at all.
Do we want to make that decision now regarding the CPI so that we can have that, those figures in front of us?
I need somebody who's smart in math to figure this out for me. We could use a CPI number higher than what exists today, right? We could we could agree 1.99, which has the effect of a pay raise from what they're currently making. Or by doing so, is there something I'm missing in that formula? So if 1.48 is the presumed from the past, and we jump to 2, let's say, percent, have we built in a base increase, or are we?
No, because that's only the COLA. So, right, so that COLA is only specific to that CPI. So it's not specific to any additional salary increases that we would be recommending, any percentage increase year to year.
But Fred, are you saying
We're
that?
projecting though, right? Our projections are set. Is that if we adopt 1.99%, that is what is going across the board
That's correct.
for those 4 years.
Unless they would want to specify a different amount per year.
Does the charter permit us?
Unfortunately, I think that if you specified a different CPI for each year of the 4 years that you're setting the salaries for, you run the risk of decreasing their salary. Is that possible?
It is.
Well, but so I'm clear too. We could make a recommendation for a CPI that's consistent for all 4 years that we're looking at, and then make an additional recommendation for a percentage salary increase to their base salary year to year in each of those 4 years. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And it looks like to me from the charter, and maybe you can clarify on the section 15.4, the commission report, that it says that our commission is gonna submit recommendations for the salary, including an annual cost of living adjustment which shall not exceed the average increase in the consumer price index or successor thereto. So we can't override what the CPI is that correct? But we get to pick which one, whether we want to use recommended, the national average versus the CPIU urban that, included Midwest, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And I think we were kind of leaning towards Dr. Lafayette's recommendation, and Joel, you raised that about, figuring out what can we agree on or decide first, whether this known 1.48% average, and using the national, and him recommending that this is good for a number of reasons discussed at the meeting and in his report to better capture Columbus and our elected official spending powers as it's been projected. And perhaps that's where, if you guys redid this chart with 1.48, we, and if it's not too troublesome, if that's helpful for everyone else, then we can see exactly what those numbers are if we agree that we want to use it.
With whatever,
Yeah.
whatever recommendations on base salary.
Right.
Yep. Increases.
And Commissioners, it took me a little bit to get back on track there, but I think I've got it straight now. Again, these are just projections. And so whatever that CPI is in these future years, that is what we go by, according to what you just referenced in the charter amendment. It doesn't exceed that amount. So these projections, again, like we were saying, we can make them anything that you want. It's, and help me out, Joellen, it's the increase to the base salary that you're essentially looking at. Would you agree with that?
Yes, in that, whatever base salary the commission adopts, the CPI added to that base salary will fluctuate during the 4 years that you're setting the salaries for.
So it has to be recalculated every year?
It will be recalculated
Right.
every year. So even if we said the average over the last 4 years is 1.48%, but the average over the 4 years that include 2019 through 2023 will be different. So that the 2024 salary might be different than what we can project sitting here today. But if the commission is concerned about elected officials not being compensated in a manner that reflects the responsibilities of their position, then the commission should consider an increase to the base salary that will exist in 2021, at the end of 2021 for 2022.
Okay.
That's simple. Well, I think we can agree that we don't, what was the term that Dr. Lafayette, we don't want to decrease the spending power,
To reduce the purchasing power.
to reduce the
Of the elected
purchasing
officials.
power
Right.
of the members, and if anything, to recognizing that we're making some adjustments for whatever responsibilities we perceive from a growing city minus 2 more council members or some calculated formula such as that. Okay, any other needs for clarification? I do think we're starting to narrow it.
Yeah.
Narrow it down.
And I think the other, if I may, Chair, the other component that we had looked at a couple of meetings ago was, I think, in terms of looking at council specifically, if we're recognizing that they are doing the equivalent of full-time work, adjusting the salaries to so that that compensation is more in line with the amount of work being performed as opposed to, and not changing the definition of, I think, leaving them as undefined, in terms of their, of that status. I think that's another decision that we have to come to, right?
So Joe, this goes to the additional question that came in after we were appointed to consider whether full-time or part-time, and that's what Joel's speaking to now. And whether we need to make any, we need to account for that. And right now, we're in an undefined situation, so I mean, I think it's gonna grow out of our discussion. I think so that would be another, I think, another question we've been asked to consider that we need to be able to address. And from an agenda standpoint, make sure we can talk about
Mr.
that.
Chairman, in terms of data, that's something that you're just going to consider more for the council members. I'm wondering if you need any additional data from us for full-time,
I
part-time?
think we have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
there
Most
too.
of
Yeah.
what we're looking
Yeah.
to is on here, and frankly, just from a quick glance, if these are designated, most people are full-time, are considered full-time.
Right. And the
Well,
salaries.
that's mayor, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong chart.
Well, the,
Well, the other one is pretty much the same.
the other cities that we looked at last time, that had ward systems, that were also undefined. I believe that's what our criteria was when we were looking at this.
Commissioners, there, on the new slides that we gave you, Lauren created a pie chart for just the information you want. It's the slide presentation, research data presentation, additional analysis, and it's page 8, which is chart 7.
And also chart 12.
And that shows the percentage of part-time and full-time council members. And then she also shows on page 13, the same for council presidents.
Is there anything in the charter that defines, I mean, it says the city council shall be full-time. Is there a definition of what that means? 38 hours, 40 hours, 100 hours?
No, Mr. Chairman, there's not. And the charter, it's my understanding that the charter does not talk about mayors and city attorneys as full-time versus part-time. It doesn't use that terminology. What it does is prohibits them from holding outside employment. The charter does not do that for council members. So there's no discussion in the charter for city council about whether or not they can or cannot hold outside employment. Therefore, if it doesn't prohibit, some council members have chosen to hold outside employment, others do not. If the commission is going to make a recommendation regarding a large increase in the council member's base salary, that could be based upon the commission's feeling that council members should not hold outside employment. But I don't think that it is this commission's responsibility to decide or make a recommendation should council be part-time, full-time, be allowed or prohibited from holding outside employment. Your responsibility under the charter is to make a salary recommendation or compensation package recommendation. And then if the reasoning behind your recommendation is something about outside employment, we can put that in the report. Council then gets to vote on your recommendations, and they could reject them, and set a salary for themselves not to exceed what was recommended. So if you recommended a huge increase, not huge, a larger increase in base salary because the commission was recommending that they be prohibited from holding outside employment, council could then take that recommendation and say, no, we don't agree with that. We are going to only increase our salary the same amount that you've increased the mayor, city attorney, and city auditor, and, you know, and go from there.
It sounds, what you described, that's a charter amendment. What, I mean, if there's nothing today that speaks to whether they being the city council members, can have outside employment, if we were to make a decision that this was, however, if we made it in the made a recommendation based upon the current language of, it would seem to me it would require a charter change.
It could very well require a charter change, although I'm not 100% convinced that it would have to be a charter change, but.
We could do, what we could do is in our recommendation, we could simply state this is based on a recognition that the council members are, you know, working the equivalent or performing the duties of a full-time, but not necessarily define that, or I guess make a recommendation or suggestion that that be defined in terms of their actual, that it remains undefined, but that we're recognizing that the increase is due to the fact that they are conducting or doing the work of a full-time employee. I think that's probably our best bet, honestly, as we move this forward, just so that we're not overstepping our responsibility as part of this charter's mandate. And I think that would give context to any increases that we might recommend. Should we make any recommendation for base salary increases? So.
This is kind of open discussion now, and I think we'll narrow it down. We got smart people around the table, we'll figure this out. But one of the things, if we describe anything in the nature of full-time employment, does that discourage the lawyer, the accountant, to run for office? Okay, this was expected to be, and I think we have a lawyer now on council, if whatever pay we assign to that seat may discourage classes of individuals to run.
Well, but
if you could have part-time employment or other employment, I guess we shouldn't even call it part-time. If you are permitted to have other employment, then he could maintain a practice, a doctor could maintain a practice,
right.
Accountant. If
Yeah.
we kind of signal this is, you're being paid full-time, it might have an impact on who we could recruit. We'll have to we'll have to sort through all of this.
Well, I think if we left it undefined, though, it keeps
it alone.
it keeps it open, yeah, so that wouldn't be a discouragement. Because there are some people, you know, who can do two jobs, you know, and I think we've seen that in past council members who've held their responsibilities, executed on their responsibilities, you know, and worked the equivalent of full-time work while maintaining another position elsewhere. I know that, yeah, I guess, so I think that leaving it undefined saves us a lot of the having to restrict any of those potential drawing of that talent to the position. So, if I could, commissioners, I think it's interesting to note, a couple of meetings ago, we talked about on the table that was shared with us of the council compensation against our benchmark cities. We were looking at those that were specifically full-time, and and I think it's interesting to note the different salaries based on those benchmark organizations or benchmark cities that, who compensate at the full-time equivalent, what those salaries are. And then, so I quickly just made a note here, or was marking up my document. You have cities like Minneapolis who also have a strong mayor council, because, correct, we have a strong mayor council. Correct, a strong mayor council, and then if we are leaning towards compensating at a full-time equivalent, their council members, for example, salaries are $98,695, and they have, they have 13 council members, so they're a little larger than ours. But I was looking at those as points of reference, and I wondered if it might be more helpful for us to kind of narrow in on some of those more specific type of cities and kind of where they are in terms of some of the salaries as we kind of look at the adjustments for council salaries.
So just a point of clarification, so we have a mayor council, not a strong mayor council. That's what it looks like the denotation is on this sheet. Like there's a difference noted.
There is a difference, Commissioner. I believe it's defined by the National League of Cities. What exactly they use to distinguish between mayor and strong mayor, I'm not sure. Did I state that incorrectly?
Well, no, I was just clarifying.
Oh, okay.
Yes, because I asked, do we have a mayor council or a strong mayor council?
Mayor council.
Mayor council, okay.
According to the
Got it, okay.
spreadsheet. Also, Commissioners, wanted to point out, Lauren actually created a slide. It's on page 9 of the presentation that's called Additional Analysis. And it shows council member base salary and general fund budget comparison.
You just don't need this.
Yeah, it's the full-time and part-time, if you're looking at that. The full-time is the, I don't know, what would you call it, kind of a medium or a lighter blue?
Oh, I see now.
Yes, and then the dark blue is part-time, and then undefined is the very light blue. Columbus, of course, would be considered in those 5 undefined cities.
And the president one is.
Oh, right, and then the president would be the, on page 14. Just for another way to look at it.
Yeah. So we'd actually come in, fourth or fifth.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to note the summary that Lauren and Greg created for the executive summary of indicators showing where we are. I start on my own sheet, council member and council president, because those are ones that I think, based on per capita and how many residents they represent, I think some increases in base pay are warranted, and also to recognize how many residents they're serving, that whether it's defined or not, it's a full-time job. And I think that if to the extent that any council members have to keep outside employment because the base is low, us recommending an increase that's more indicative of the number of residents they serve, and no matter whether they're working another job or not, this is still full-time. I think that works itself out, that we recognize this is full-time and it can be full-time, and then like you were discussing, it leaves it to the individual members and to the public to decide whether, they're doing a good job if they're doing both jobs and have outside employment. But what those increases should be, I haven't decided yet. I mean, that's what we're here to start talking about, but I think where we rank in base salary for both council member and council president of similar cities, and then dropping down even farther once it's per capita and all the residents served, I think those are the ones that probably need the largest increases.
Yeah, I agree, Diana. It seems to me if we establish the starting point, which I think is step 1, and then going forward, we have had tremendous growth, as we've talked about, since the last 4 years. And so, looking back, had we recognized the growth and had tried to tie the salaries of 4 years ago up to the present, we would have had a greater than a 199 increase. And so I think, I mean, just as a general statement, I think that means we've pushed the numbers lower than they would have pushed had we tied it into per capita.
Right.
And as our resident authority on movement of people,
Well, I wouldn't
would
say
you forecast, are you in agreement with the forecast of growth in the region? and
Well,
the city?
yeah,
I mean, the
well-
continued growth.
Here, anyone's crystal ball's as good as mine, but it just seems to me that we are on a strong upward momentum.
Okay.
And I don't, who knows when the next R comes. I mean, but it seems to me that we should at least recognize that our growth has been considerable, and not trying to say that all the credit goes to our mayor and city council or auditor, but certainly they've been an encouragement of it and a motivation for it. And so I'm not trying to, sound like their advocate particularly, but it just seems to me in fairness, we should recognize that.
I would say over the course of my career, Columbus has established itself as having probably the most secure and diverse economy,
Yeah.
which has helped to foster its growth. As government grew, as the university grew, and these things all came together here. So I think I would agree with you. If, as a layperson looking out, I would suspect that the growth might continue into the foreseeable future, and we probably need to account for that in our deliberation.
I also think our move into this new ward system would be another justification, given that, that those individuals will be responsible for ensuring that this particular, the particular area that they represent, their constituents are heard and being, serviced in a manner by the city, I think will be another factor to consider, since that'll be a dedicated area for them to serve out of.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the executive summary. So where you have salary as a percent of the general fund budget, and for instance, with the mayor is +5, is that +5% above the median?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, is it the last indicator there, salary?
Right, for the mayor's salary as a percent of general fund budget, is that?
That is with the city manager included in that.
But I just
So-
want to make sure I understand what the +5% is.
Ye-
Is that
yes, ma'am,
5%
that is-
above the median?
That is correct, yes. And then there were a few that came out right at median, farther down.
And so generally, when you look at city employee salaries, is your target the median?
It is, yes, yes. When we're market pricing, and going out into the market and seeing what other employees are being paid for similar duties, not exactly the same, but 70% or more job match, then yes, we look at the median.
So I think I don't disagree with the other commissioners with respect to there could be an opportunity, but when I think about kind of the fiscal responsibility of this decision as well, and then I see that there are, when you compare it to budget, where we have the median, which is generally what the benchmark is, and then there are a number of the positions are greater than the median with respect to the general fund budget, that does give me some pause as to whether or not across the board increases appear to be warranted based on the executive summary.
And I think my particular focus has been council members, because I think that was we have a different configuration that we're looking at now versus what we were looking at before. I agree with you in terms of the mayor and the city attorney and city auditor. I think that for those positions, we might look at it a little differently. So I guess for those positions, I would be more comfortable remaining closer to the median, or not necessarily making as big of a recommendation for an increase. The council member, I think, is the one that has had the most variables at play for us than what was in the last commission discussion.
Well, there probably is another number that could be added to this executive summary with respect to council. It shows us ranked as second, and I think that's based upon a council of 7. And that's,
Residents per council member, yes, sir.
and so the relationship to median is high, but we are forecasting when it's going to be 9 council members. And where would that put us based upon information we now have?
We could add that
Population,
information.
what would that 68 look more like? It's still gonna be a high number, I suspect, but.
But this is also salaries that are part-time and full-time, so that's the other thing, right, in terms of overall,
Well, yes.
what we're considering,
At
so,
the median, you're gonna have to have both, yeah.
right, right. So I was just wondering, back to the point I was making earlier, in terms of looking at all of the councils that are full-time, and looking at those specific salaries, it was just interesting to see kind of how they vary as well, based on the size, and just additional, the data here is super helpful, I think, in terms of as we look at that. What, do we want to define a process for, for the next meeting so that we can narrow in on this a little bit more regarding
Yeah, I
if
think
we
that's what
each
we
want to
should-
come with a recommendation, or do we want to?
In terms of just kind of splitting this.
I wonder.
Splitting the work up. No, I think that could be very helpful in terms of our focus. That's, okay, we're scheduled here.
So I think so far the commission has identified at least 3 decision points that they would like to focus on. One being base salary, the other being which CPI to use for the COLA increases, and the third being, are you going to increase base salaries for council members in particular? So if those are the 3 decision points that the commission wants to work with, then, you can take all of the data, formulate in your own minds, in between now and sometime in September, we need to set a meeting, and then, come back, persuade each other, and hopefully vote on a final recommendation at that point. The commission needs.
I'm sorry.
The commission needs to get a recommendation to council so that council can have something and vote on it before the end of this calendar year.
Which is prior to October 1. Or
No, prior to December 31st.
And I just might mention that I think there's one council meeting scheduled for the month of December. So the rest of December is kind of out.
And we are not, we're moving into our last meetings, and this isn't gonna be very
Just so you know,
prolonged.
you didn't necessarily have until the very end of the year.
I'd rather get it done.
Right.
Is anybody opposed?
And of course, we like to submit legislation
Well,
early.
it's fresh in our minds as well, and we've been talking, and, from the information we got from the auditor last meeting, and we've been kind of close together, I think it's better to keep moving.
Yes, let's try to wrap it up. Now, and what I was going to ask, with respect to those 3 decision areas, what will be the criteria that we elect to use in making decisions on each? So, for instance, cost of living, that's pretty straightforward. What of the 10, which of the 2 or 3 that has been suggested, do we want to, that will be a decision we would have to make. Salary increases, are we going to be, or how do we merge population, size of council, what's the other criteria here? Percentage of general fund. mean, which of these, how are we going to weight or decide that which is important in that consideration? I think we've kind of roundtabled already whether we think full or part-time, and that'll just be a decision each of us can think about and come to some conclusion. But I do think we have data in two of the three that ought to be the focus of our consideration. And where do we place the highest weight?
Well, and that's why I was asking, what is the standard for when you're looking at employees' increases? And I imagine, right, you say you take in consideration median, but also budget. Are you looking at per capita?
I'm sorry, when you were asking before, Commissioner Williams, my answer was in reference to pricing jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Are you asking for adjustments to pay instead?
So no, I was asking about how you price a job earlier, but now I'm asking, about how you consider merit increases for employees.
Oh, merit increases.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, merit increases would be.
Because that's essentially what we're essentially talking about now for council, right?
Okay.
If we're talking about adjusting base salary and it hasn't been adjusted, essentially it would be akin to a merit increase.
We make a distinction here between a merit increase and a cost of living adjustment, or it's typically called an across-the-board pay adjustment, and that accounts for the for inflation and things like that.
We're talking about both, right? So we're talking about a potential COLA, right? That's
Right.
one of the things that we're considering. But I'm sorry, I
Plus
forgot
an
your
increase
name.
to base.
Joellen, but when Joellen went through her list, right, that was only one of the considerations. The other consideration would be an increase to base that, in my mind, is separate and apart from what the COLA increase would be.
I agree
Okay.
completely, yes.
One of the things that we've asked for is we have 6 collective bargaining units. How are their salaries being adjusted under current contracts? That will give us, I think, a frame, let's say 3% increases.
Yeah.
That kind of gives us an indication of the direction that the city has budgeted and forecasted in terms of the revenues to meet those obligations.
And anecdotally, it is about 3%. It's on average, that is what has been happening, and that is what's currently happening. We negotiated all 6 unions last year in 2017. 2 of them have gone over into this year, and they're still being negotiated right now. So we don't have the answers for those 2, but on average, in the past, recent past, and currently, it's about 3%. Again, anecdotally, we will certainly get the exact numbers for you.
And every employee is covered by a bargaining unit?
No, ma'am.
Right.
The majority of employees are. There are about 750 people citywide who are in a non-bargaining unit called the MCP, the Management Compensation Plan. The elected officials also are included in the MCP.
So I think that's what I'm trying to get at. So how are their increases determined?
They're determined by each elected official under whom they fall.
So the non-elected official employees?
Yes.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Unless there's been some dramatic change, but that also is fed by what the collective bargaining agreements are looking like, too. I mean, that is accounted for.
Yeah.
That they're not falling behind the general population
Yeah.
of employees.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think, Fred, to your point about the criteria to be used, and I think, and maybe we can see if we're all on the same page as I understand it, I think if I go home and I come back and I say, I think the president of council, I recommend this increase in base salary, and here's why. I think we're more similar to Austin and other similar cities that have this many per capita, even accounting for the 2 new members that will be coming, would warrant that, it'd be fair, and put that out. And if everyone agrees with me, or if they don't, or we add something else, that ends up going into our report if we approve that number and our reasons why. Would that be right, Joellen?
Yes.
I mean, that we would, so I think maybe we don't have to just yet as a group decide exactly what we're looking at. We have all these data numbers,
Right.
and each one of us might see something as more
Oh, yeah.
compelling.
Definitely.
And then if we come back and say, this is what I want to, argue for lack of, or suggest these increases because I think these data points are important, and if we agree
Yeah.
on that, then, we may come to consensus.
Would-
And Commissioner, not to reinvent the wheel either, I wanted to point out, pardon me, exactly what you're saying. The commission from 3 years ago, the first commission, did that same thing. So if you look up in the report from 2015, beginning on page 12, the recommendations for each elected officials, I can let you have this. It actually states the commission believed that in this case, it's 3% increase was justified for the following reasons. And in this case, for the mayor, they actually listed them out. There were 4 reasons.
I
And
must
so.
have left my book in the
Sure.
office. I thought I had all my materials. I'm sorry.
Very good.
Thank you.
Would it be
Right,
helpful?
okay.
To your point, Diana, would it be helpful if we all kind of took a stab at making recommendations and kind of maybe sent them to Joellen and then kind of compile those to see where we land? Or do we want to kind of do this as a group consensus? I'm curious to know kind of what the process is. So, I mean, for each one, because in terms of, based on, as you mentioned, our own research, how we're weighting things, and maybe having a spreadsheet that compiles where we're thinking to all look at together to kind of, to pitch our specific recommendation, and then kind of see where, how closely we're aligned or how far we might be off. Just a thought in terms of process.
Right.
Explain to me what this particular provision is saying to me. With a 3% increase in 2020, and using the 2011 to 2015 COLA of 1.99% for 2021, the average 2-year increase is 3%. So are they adding the COLA? Well, I'm not sure I understand what that's.
This is page 12.
Yes, it's number 4 in the recommendations.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll have to look at that closer and get back to you on it.
Okay. It sounds like it should be 5%, but if they got 3% plus 1.99, but yeah. And the other thing that is stated here, that the mayor was, the position of the mayor's salary had not been increased for a number of years, so there was somewhat of a catch-up in.
Yeah, I think that we talked about that at one of the meetings, that they had to do a catch-up, and now where our
Right.
mayor falls on the chart and median with comparator cities is much better.
Should we try to set another meeting, and how much time do we think we need to review and prepare? The more we can review and prepare, the shorter the meeting.
So, Mr. Chairman, yes, we do need to set at least one more meeting, probably 2, I'm guessing. If things go well at the next meeting and all of the recommendations get agreed upon by the commission, then we could always cancel.
Who's doing this?
I am, apparently. Apparently I will be creating the report. But really, the commission does not need to approve the report. You just need to approve the recommendations, and then, we will put together a fine piece of literature for council members to peruse in looking at your recommendations. So,
So is this simply a compilation of all of the data
For the most part,
most
yes,
part.
yeah.
But we haven't
If you
seen-
look, honestly, if you look at the 2015 report, the actual recommendations for salaries only take up page 11 to page 18. And that includes the recommendation on CPI. And so all of the other material in here is data, PowerPoint presentations, and some analysis of the data, which we would put together based upon your discussions of what criteria are the important criteria for consideration. So, yeah. So in thinking about a next meeting, I want to give you time to consider your thoughts and consider all of the data. But I did have, I guess, a couple of suggested dates, if I can find where I wrote that down.
Was this prepared for the last commission?
No.
No, ma'am, it wasn't.
How easy was this to put together? Is it cumbersome?
Fairly easy.
I just like to see the progress over time. So based on the recommendations that were made the last time, you know, how we got to these numbers. So like you said, there was there was some catch-up done for the mayor. So based on that catch-up that was done, for instance, if I use base salary, we're second now. Were we 10th? And the work that we did last time is what got us to second? Are you tracking with me?
Okay. So, so the data from 3 years ago, add a column for the 2015 commission, what was the position of that elected official then?
Exactly, in all these categories.
Okay.
So my first suggestion is September 13th.
Thursday?
And we could use the 10 to noon slot that we've used in the past. 9:13.
Yeah, I could do the 13th, but I could only do 11 to 1. I can't do 10 to noon.
Would 11 to 1 suit everyone?
That would work.
I could do it.
Yep.
All right, we'll set that for September 13th then, from 11 to 1. And then also September 27th. I'm picking Thursdays only because you all had picked Thursdays previously, so I didn't know if that meant that that was good for your calendars or not.
What was the date, Joy?
September 27.
This will be a tentative then, huh?
Correct.
Yeah.
That works for me.
10 to noon, is that what we're looking at again?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
That would work for me.
Hold on one second,
Yeah,
I'm trying
me
to
too,
get this one down. The first one down, make sure.
I will send
Okay.
out calendar invites to all of you.
And then September 27th was the other date,
Yes,
and 10 to,
10 to 12.
okay, that might be the last day in September. I don't think that's gonna work for me.
Okay?
And then I'm gonna be gone 2 weeks.
What about Monday, the 24th of September?
I can't do that day.
Okay. Wednesday, the 26th of September.
I'm out on Wednesday.
Shall we go back a week?
Yeah.
How's Thursday, the 20th?
I can't do Thursday, sorry.
The 19th?
That works for me.
Yep, that works.
Sorry?
That works for me.
I could do the 19th as well.
If we can, if it's a 10 to noon time slot, that would work for me.
I'll be a little late. I've got a 9 o'clock appointment. It'll spill into about 10:30.
I just have to be finished by 1.
So we could do 11 to 1?
That works for me.
11 to 1? Okay. Sold.
So we have September 13th from 11 to 1 and September 19th from 11 to 1.
Yes.
Okay. And the one on the 19th will be tentative, assuming we can't get everything voted on the previous meeting, the 13th.
Do we want to, and that Joel, I think this goes back to your point, we'll all be thinking about and giving our opinion on each of the 5 elected positions. Do we want to assign or break up, like for each one of us to make an initial recommendation and present that? Or do you think, will we all go back and have our own, like, for example, if I said, I'm going to focus on the mayor and I'm going to look at the data points and I'm going to present what I think and open it up for discussion with something as opposed to all of us going back and doing that all for each position. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
There's 5 positions and there's 5 of us. How would you, what would be your desire?
I actually personally want to look at all of them myself.
Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense. I thought I'd just open it up, whether how best to present it and be efficient, but if we all come back ready next time and have some ideas on where we think it should be, and
Yeah.
whoever wants to start the discussion on, go by each member, maybe we do it that way.
Yeah,
Or
and
each official, rather.
I suspect we're gonna, once we kind of fit into a category, you know,
Right.
like a 3% or 1.99, once we fit into that, then we're gonna be looking for, is there a reason why this position versus this position should be up or down? So,
And I think that was to my point, if we are able to have where we all are with our recommendations
Right.
in one document when we sit down, I think that would be really helpful for us to see where we kind of all are in comparison at a quick glance, and kind of see where, if we're in agreement that the COLA should be, this specific amount, then, and that maybe the mayor's salary, we're all pretty close, then I think that will help speed up that process for us.
and to that point, the other thing that would be helpful, if you are making assumptions,
Right.
that you kind of make sure
We
you
outline those.
you outline those assumptions so we can compare and contrast.
And Greg, could you send us the updated, ahead of our next meeting, so that we can use the updated table that,
Executive summary? you mean
and
with
this
that?
one,
Oh.
I think we're gonna with the, 1.48%?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
And I just want to make sure that I understand the request from Chair Rancier. So with respect to the bargaining units, you're providing what specifically?
We're providing the information in terms of percentage increases, what each of the bargaining units received for this contract cycle,
Just percentages?
percentage increases.
Gotcha.
Percentage increases.
Yeah.
I think from what we're gathering, the 2 big areas in terms of compensation will be the percentage increase and the cost of, what is the cost of living factors that we are adopting? Because Midwest was much lower than major cities.
Right, and I think that's why I was asking for the clarification, because I'm really trying to understand if there's a policy in place for how employees' increases are determined. So if there's already a policy, a standard that you all use, right? So you talked about with respect to market pricing, right? The standard is we try to be at median. If there's some type of policy with respect to how increases are determined, be it bargaining unit or otherwise, I'd be curious to see that.
Well, Commissioner, for the vast majority of our employees, because the vast majority are union employees, that's all done through the collective bargaining process, and what takes place during those contract negotiations, that's how that's determined. So
Yeah.
essentially, when it comes out, I'm not a labor relations professional. I've been at the table before for consulting purposes and things like that, but essentially what comes out of that agreement is what it is.
For the bargaining unit folks.
Yes, and again, for the vast majority of our employees.
Yep, and then for those non-bargaining unit folks.
Right, for
Do you
the
have a
non-
policy in place for how you're determining increases?
Yeah, it is the elected official who's over that
They have
particular.
discretion. There's no parameters for that individual.
They take my office's recommendations and the recommendations of the Department Director of Human Resources, but essentially, that is a true statement.
And so and so your department and the head of HR doesn't have guidelines with which how you determine what your recommendation is?
We do indeed. That information comes from, we do look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, but the organization, the certification society, or let's say compensation organization that certifies me as a certified compensation professional. It's called World at Work.
Yep.
Used to be known as the American Compensation Association, and now it's international. They do a very comprehensive salary survey in which we participate every year. Those results come out in August
Yeah.
of every year.
So, but
And-
that's for the benchmark, right? So that's,
It
but
is.
I'm more thinking of merit increases. So for instance, in my organization, if we're doing an off-cycle increase, our standard is that we generally do something between 3 to 5%. If we're doing a promotional increase, the promotional increase is generally more than that, maybe 9 to 12%, depending on where that person falls within the range. And so that's what I'm trying to get at. Is there a standard with which you have when you make those recommendations of where you generally would want to be?
Well, we have two different ways, and I'm not trying to split hairs either in describing the different types of pay increases. So first of all, based off of that World at Work survey, there's a pay structure adjustment. Then there's an across-the-board pay increase, average, pardon me, or median. And then in addition to that, there is what everyone is doing in terms of merit pay increases. The merit pay discussion is quite different for MCP employees, again, which the elected officials are in that group,
Yeah.
than what it is for union employees. And so for me to give you one answer for all of those employees, it wouldn't be the same.
That's not what I'm asking for. I'm not asking
Yeah.
for one answer. I'm just asking what the standard is. So you
Yeah.
said for bargaining unit folks, it's in their contracts. I completely get that. But for those non-bargaining unit folks, that's what I'm trying to get at. Is there a standard in how you derive your recommendation that you then give to the elected officials for their discretion?
There is, but again, that is the across-the-board pay increase to this cost of living adjustment, so to speak. The merit pay is a different set of circumstances, and that is left up to that particular elected official. It is a policy that if it's written down, that if it's set, that they set on their own.
On their own?
Yes, ma'am. For pay adjustments, there is a pay policy that we refer to for promotions, for initial setting of pay, and so on. There is one.
Yep, that's what I would like to see.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay.
So based upon Commissioner Diaz's suggestion that everybody come up with your sort of thoughts on base and the benchmarks that you're using or whatever, that we could then compile into one document for your consideration at the next meeting. We will try to get all of this additional information to you before the Labor Day holiday, so within the next week. Can we do that?
We can do that.
Because I'm not doing it. Can we do that?
We can do it.
And then if you all could get your feedback to me by September 7th or 10th, at least a few days before the meeting, so that we can get it all compiled and have it for you at the meeting, or even before the meeting, I can email it out.
Great. Would it be possible for, and I don't mean to make more work for you, if there's a template you'd like for us to, that would be helpful, just so that we're all kind of submitting to you the same content information. That way it's probably easier on your end to organize.
Yeah, so probably each elected official, you know,
Right.
base salary, COLA,
Okay.
and then any benchmarks or
Okay.
criteria that you utilized in getting to those places.
Great.
We'll figure it out.
Perfect. All right.
Greg will figure it out.
Just writing a couple things down. I'll be able to help out there.
Greg, this is now updated, right?
Yes.
What we
Yes,
have
sir,
today,
it is.
this is no longer,
Correct. The one that you got today is the
Okay.
most recent
Correct.
numbers.
putting together a package to take home.
Right.
Just to be clear, Joellen, you're asking each of us to submit to you by, what was that date again?
By September 7th.
By September 7th?
But our email will be open through the 10th. I heard that too.
But at that date, you want us to give you our individual criterion that,
Right, so based upon what Commissioner Diaz suggested, if you can get to me your thoughts or suggestions on salary, all right, base salary, the COLA, and then whatever criteria you're utilizing in making those recommendations, we'll try to compile that all into one document. I can make it, if you're not wanting to own your work, I can, compile it into an anonymous spreadsheet so that it just says, here were the 5 suggestions for mayor. Yeah, somebody's gonna argue for it in the meeting, I would imagine, so.
The only other thing that I'm still not entirely clear, I think what I read in the report, the 15 report, was 3% salary increase per year, I think. But that last line, if you could just kind of help me understand what.
Yes, sir, I have
What
that
the-
as a follow-up item.
Yeah.
One of the, I suppose you'd call it disadvantages that I have is in providing the data and answering questions and kind of having that role. I'm not the same person who actually wrote the report. Yes, so I need to figure out the wording there and the language and make sure that my interpretation of it is correct. So that's why I didn't want to give you an answer today.
Yeah, I appreciate that wholly, but, it just.
We'll make sure you have the
Yeah.
answer, though.
So Greg, based on the 7th deadline that Joellen just provided us, when do you think that we'll have what you're going to send out to us?
We can have that for you before the Labor Day holiday. Maybe that Thursday or Friday before.
Nothing like working over Labor Day.
Exactly. Thanks for that gift.
Well, would even sooner be better? We may be able to do that.
the Labor Day holiday is a week away. I mean,
so,
basically,
when
this week and the
prepared,
next week.
Shoot it out.
Yeah, if you have it ready, whenever.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. Anything else we need to discuss today? Okay. I think then we are adjourned. Yes. Thank you.